began with an anonymous email, no sender, no trace, just a file. Inside was a story so unbelievable, most assumed it was fiction. A secret program, 12 humans, one alien planet, and a government that swore it never happened. If stories like this make you question everything, tap subscribe and turn on the bell. This is the Midnight Channel, where the strange never sleeps. In 2005, a strange series of emails began circulating among members of a private UFO discussion group. The sender used the name Anonymous, and the emails were detailed, very detailed. They claimed to be the declassified records of a secret US government program, one that involved actual contact with an alien civilization. At first, people ignored it. There were hoaxes before, lots of them. But something about these messages felt different. They didn't beg for attention. They didn't try to convince. They simply told a story, one that started decades earlier. The first email described a moment in 1965, when officials in the US Air Force allegedly made contact with beings from another planet. The beings didn't just communicate. They made a proposal, an exchange. 12 humans to visit their world. In return, they'd leave one of their own on Earth. The emails claimed the beings were from a planet called SERPO in a distant system near Zeta Reticuli, and that the mission, though highly classified, had actually happened. According to Anonymous, the 12 astronauts trained for 6 years, learning the alien language, preparing for atmospheric differences, adjusting to artificial gravity, and receiving implants that would allow two-way monitoring. In 1965, they left. Only 8 returned. The files didn't stop at the mission details. They included supposed medical logs, psychological reports, even environmental breakdowns of the alien world, and the way it was written, calm, technical, matter of fact. It didn't sound like science fiction. It sounded like documentation. That's what caught the attention of researchers. Bill Ryan, a known UFO enthusiast and early Project Camelot contributor, was one of the first to publicly archive the emails. He claimed to have verified at least some of the metadata, and he wasn't alone. A few intelligence community insiders, some retired, others anonymous, suggested that parts of the story matched things they had heard during their time in government work, but no one could say for sure who sent the files or why. The emails came through a secure server. No IP trail, no personal language quirks, no signature habits in the writing. They just appeared one after another. Over months, each one adding more detail, more structure, more questions. Skeptics were quick to dismiss it, calling it a clever RGA, long-form hoax with decent production value. But there were 2 problems with that explanation. First, no one took credit. And second, some of the details in the SERPO documents weren't public knowledge at the time. For example, descriptions of certain base layouts, medical procedures, and even internal terminology used by intelligence agencies in the 1960s. These things matched later, declassified material stuff that hadn't been available in 2005. So if it was a hoax, it was one built on information that shouldn't have been available yet. That's what made people pause, because while it was easy to laugh off a story about humans visiting another planet, it was harder to explain how the hoaxer knew things they shouldn't have. The documents described everything from landing protocols to time dilation effects to the psychological stress of returning to Earth after years on an alien world. They even included reports on the Ebons, the beings from SERPO, their culture, social structure, food, sleep cycles, technology. It wasn't a story about aliens coming to Earth. It was about humans leaving Earth and what that did to them. And then the email stopped. No warning, no final message, just silence, but for many. That silence was louder than anything else, because in the world of cover-ups, a sudden stop is often the loudest confirmation. According to the leaked documents, the idea of an exchange wasn't new. It allegedly began in 1947. After the Roswell crash, the surviving occupant of the recovered craft, an extraterrestrial the government later called EBE-1, was said to have lived for 5 years at a secure facility in New Mexico. EBE-1 reportedly learned English, shared information about his home planet, and left behind a communication device before he died. That device, years later, is said to have activated. A signal came through, clear, directed, and intelligent. It was from his people. A meeting was arranged, first contact, or rather, second. The beings were humanoid, but different enough to be unsettling. They called themselves Ebons, and they claimed to come in peace. The documents state that multiple U.S. agencies met with them, all sworn to secrecy. It was during one of these exchanges that the idea was introduced, a program to send human representatives to their world, to observe, to learn, to report back. In return, they would leave one of their own behind, to do the same. It was a gesture of trust, an interstellar handshake, but it wasn't accepted right away. Years passed. Documents claim there were internal debates, concerns about the biological and psychological risks, worries about sending people so far with no guarantee of return. Eventually, in the early 1960s, approval was granted and preparations began. The documents detail a rigorous selection process. Thousands of military personnel were screened. Only 12 were chosen, 6 men, 6 women, all with backgrounds in science, medicine, engineering, and survival training. Each one was said to have been removed from public records, their families told they had died in classified operations, their identities erased for the duration of the mission. They trained in isolation, learning Ebon physiology, studying their language, being fitted with implants for communication and tracking. They also underwent genetic analysis. The Ebens reportedly required DNA samples to ensure no latent vulnerabilities would be exposed in their environment. One strange note from the documents. The Ebens were reportedly insistent on a specific time window for departure, something about planetary alignment, energy efficiency, or gravitational conditions. Whatever the reason, the launch was set for 1965. The location, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico. Specially modified Ebon craft was brought to Earth, said to be larger than any previous vehicle and capable of housing all 12 humans for the 10-month journey, according to the records. Only a handful of U.S. officials were present at the departure. The team boarded, the hatch sealed, and the craft lifted silently into the early morning sky. There was no announcement, no witnesses, no trace. The government called it a high-altitude atmospheric experiment and filed it away. But behind the scenes, a quiet panic set in, because once the ship left Earth, all contact was lost. The implants didn't work across that distance. Or maybe they were never supposed to. For 10 months, there was nothing. Then a signal. The craft had arrived. The transmission was brief, but confirmed the team had landed safely. What followed were years of silence. Then a single message from the Ebon homeworld, 4 words: "We will return 8." The planet was called SERPO, name assigned by the U.S. team based on Ebon terminology. Its actual designation wasn't something pronounceable in human language. According to the documents, The planet orbited a double sun in the Zeta Reticuli system, roughly 39 light-years from Earth. Its climate was harsh. One sun provided a searing, white-hot glare, the other a dull red glow that never fully set. The team had to adjust quickly. Temperatures were higher than expected, often above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Radiation levels were elevated, but not immediately lethal. The Ebens provided sheltered domes that filtered the sunlight and controlled internal conditions, but even so, several team members reportedly experienced severe fatigue and required constant hydration. Gravity on SERPO was slightly lower than Earth's, enough to cause mild disorientation, but manageable. Days were long, roughly 43 hours, and the humans struggled to adapt to the extended cycles of light and dark. Food was a problem early on. The Ebens ate a paste-like substance made from native vegetation, nutrient-dense, but nearly impossible for the humans to stomach. Eventually, the team's own supplies ran out, and they were forced to adjust. Some members became sick. Others adapted. One reportedly developed a condition resembling radiation sickness, but recovered with Eben medical assistance. The Ebens themselves were described as peaceful, highly structured, and deeply communal. They had no formal government, but operated on a kind of group consensus. Their technology was advanced, but not in ways that mimicked human innovation. Instead of machines, they used organic interfaces, living systems that responded to touch and emotion. They communicated through sound, but also something else, a kind of emotional projection, like shared intent more than language. The team lived among them for nearly 13 Earth years, though time moved differently on SERPO. According to one log, what felt like 20 years passed there. The mission was supposed to last 10, but the team stayed longer. Some chose not to return, others died from exposure, from illness, from what the documents simply described as integration failure. Only 8 made it back. They returned in 1978 to a secured base in Nevada, where they were debriefed, isolated, and monitored for the rest of their lives. Their physical condition had changed. One had lost significant bone density. Another developed a form of anemia that couldn't be explained. But the biggest change was psychological. They didn't dream the same way anymore. They didn't process time the same way. And some reported hearing voices, not external, but internal, like echoes from a place they'd left behind, but hadn't really escaped. None of them spoke publicly. Their identities remained classified, and all records were sealed. According to the leaked files, 2 of the 8 died within a year of returning. 3 more passed within a decade. The last 3 lived in isolation, monitored, occasionally visited by individuals described as observers. They left no memoirs, no interviews, just one message. Recorded by a female team member in her final year, "I saw the stars from another sky. I walked a world not ours, and I came back, but not whole. Not really." When the 8 surviving members returned from SERPO, they didn't come back empty-handed. According to the documents, they brought artifacts, biological samples, and something the files only referred to as transmissions. The artifacts were described as crystalline devices, capable of storing vast amounts of information, but their interface required emotional calibration. Only one team member reportedly succeeded in accessing it. What they found was a record, a visual archive of Eben history, stretching back thousands of years. Wars, extinctions, space travel, contact with other species, some of which were described in terrifying detail. There was one entry that stood out, a holographic depiction of Earth, not as it is, but as it was roughly 7,000 years ago. The implication being, the Ebons had been here before, long before Roswell, long before modern civilization. Some researchers believe the artifacts may have formed the basis of later technological breakthroughs, that the sudden leaps in microprocessing and fiber optics in the 1980s weren't coincidence, but reverse-engineered gifts, but that's only part of what came back. The biological samples were kept in deep storage. Plant matter, insects and airborne spores, all were non-hostile, but some displayed growth patterns that didn't follow Earth biology, fungi that reacted to human emotion, moss that altered color in response to electromagnetic fields. Nothing was weaponized, nothing was shared publicly. Then there were the transmissions. Each crew member had recorded thoughts, observations, and personal reflections during their time on SERPO. These logs were encoded and transmitted back using Ebon tech. Some of them were corrupted, others were incomplete, but a few survived, and what they contained was disturbing, not because of what was seen, but because of what was felt. One entry described a moment when 3 crew members stood at the edge of a massive canyon on SERPO, looking out across a shimmering horizon. Each one reported feeling a presence behind them, but when they turned, no one was there. Later, each of them described seeing the same figure in their dreams. Tall, faceless. Not Ebon, one crew member wrote. It watched us watching them, like we were the experiment, not the visitors. Another described hearing a sound, low, constant, and growing louder the longer they stayed on the planet by year 9. Most of the team reported migraines, disorientation, and emotional detachment. 2 members reportedly refused to return to Earth. They asked to remain with the Ebons permanently, and their request was granted. No record of them exists beyond that. The returning 8 were never the same. Some developed strange sensitivities to light. Others reacted violently to certain frequencies. One man lost all sense of taste and smell, but gained what he described as pattern intuition, an ability to detect unseen connections between events. The documents hint that some form of telepathic resonance may have been left behind, a kind of imprint, not fully understood. Worse, it may have spread. One of the physicians assigned to monitor the returning crew reportedly began having dreams. He described locations he'd never visited, symbols he couldn't read, and a constant sensation of being watched. He eventually checked himself into a private facility, citing memetic contamination. That phrase appears multiple times in the leaked files, memetic contamination, as if the ideas themselves were infectious, as if just knowing too much could be dangerous. The artifacts were eventually sealed in a remote installation, believed to be within the same network as S4, not far from Groom Lake. Access was limited, research was halted, and the entire program was buried under layers of compartmentalization. But some things couldn't be buried, because whatever the crew brought back wasn't just physical, it was in them, and maybe it still is. After the emails stopped, there was a strange silence. Not just online, but in the community that had been buzzing about Project SERPO for months. Websites vanished. Forum threads were deleted. Even archived PDFs began disappearing from mirrors that had stored them for years. Researchers who had been vocal about the project suddenly went quiet. A few recanted their support, Others disappeared from public view entirely. Bill Ryan, one of the original promoters of the SERPO leaks, distanced himself from the documents, claiming he no longer believed they were genuine, but his reversal raised eyebrows, especially after reports surfaced that he had received visits from unknown individuals, the kind who don't carry identification and never leave a paper trail. One document, leaked years later, claimed a joint task force within the US intelligence community was assigned to monitor online discussions around SERPO, its official name. Project Red Book. Its goal was not to erase SERPO, but to confuse it, to flood the internet with half-truths, fake details, contradictory timelines. The goal wasn't to debunk, it was to overload, to make it impossible to know what was real. And what was fabrication, classic disinformation. Even FOIA requests returned little. Some files were acknowledged, but heavily redacted. Others were denied outright, citing national security. One reply stated that no such program exists or has ever existed under that name, but never addressed the contents of the leaked emails. That wording mattered because to experienced researchers, it suggested what it always does in cases like this. They might call it something else. There were also rumors of deaths. A journalist in Arizona, a systems analyst in Nevada, both reportedly digging into the background of the SERPO documents. Both died under suspicious circumstances within months of each other. Official causes were accidents, but the timing raised questions. Then there was the audio incident. In 2008, a shortwave radio operator claimed to have intercepted a scrambled military transmission that referenced returning personnel from asset SRPO. The clip was uploaded to a small conspiracy forum, then disappeared hours later. Not just from the site, but from backups, from users' hard drives, from everywhere. Those who had downloaded it reported file corruption, unreadable sectors, or entire hard drives failing after opening it. It was never recovered. And maybe that was the point, because while the SERPO leaks had stopped, something else had started, a pattern of suppression. Not total erasure, but quiet intimidation. Whistleblowers contacted researchers, then ghosted. Accounts that had shared SERPO content were banned, shadow banned, or simply wiped. One former intelligence analyst, posting under the name Conduit 89, claimed that SERPO was real, but that it was only the beginning, that it was the proof of concept for something far larger. A framework for human extraterrestrial cooperation, hidden behind layers of black budget funding and interagency secrecy, he wrote. They're not just covering up the trip, they're covering up what we agreed to when they brought our people back. That post stayed live for exactly 12 minutes, then vanished, and the account was deleted. Whether SERPO was real, an elaborate hoax, or something in between. One thing remains consistent: someone doesn't want you asking about it. And in the world of UFO disinformation, that silence is often the loudest signal of all. There's a file still floating around, buried in obscure corners of the internet, archived on forums that haven't been active in years. It's just a plain text document, no images, no formatting, just words, but when you open it, it starts the same way. This is not fiction. Do not try to trace this. Do not ask how I know. It reads like the others, structured, calm, almost clinical, but the details don't match the official SERPO documents. They go deeper. They describe events that supposedly happened after the mission ended. One line stands out. We brought something back with us, and it's not contained. There's no confirmation, no verification, just rumors. But then again, that's how it always starts. Some believe the SERPO story was a cover, that the real mission went somewhere else entirely. Not Zeta Reticuli, but a place no one's willing to name. Others believe the mission failed, that only some of the crew returned, and that the files were released to see who might react, to test for leaks. But there's one theory that refuses to die, that the mission happened exactly as described, and that one of the 8 never truly came back. They returned in body, but not in mind, and for years they were studied, observed, and eventually silenced. In 2013, a Freedom of Information request returned a single redacted document from an Air Force archive. It included the phrase psychogenic residual echo and the initials SERPO. It was the first time the project name had appeared in an official file, even if buried under black ink, and that was all it took for the search to start again, for the documents to resurface, for people to begin wondering. Because if even one part of it is true, if 12 humans really left Earth, if 8 really returned, then the question isn't whether Project SERPO happened. It's what else happened that we were never told. New mysteries are revealed every week. This is the Midnight Channel, where the strange never sleeps.